In our walk with Christ, we will always face a stumbling block inevitably. And one of those stumbling blocks for a lot of us happens to be paralysis by analysis, aka having too many choices and not knowing which one to pick. And when we're at those crossroads in life, we most often just want to pick the path that God most likely wants us to go down. And in this episode, we'll be talking with Andy, who went through an incredible journey of discernment, and we'll be learning the lessons that he learned from it. I know that you're both a pastor and have been working on starting up a new church in your area, and I'm just trying to think. I'm man, I wonder what would be kind of the best story for you to share. But I was oh well, you know what? I'll let Andy decide that. That's not up to me.
Sure. Yeah.
So I guess to start off, could you just kind of I guess briefly talk about who you are and what you do?
So my name is Andy. I've been a pastor for about 10 years. For the last 5 or so, I was the pastor of a congregation of 200 people. I'm just outside of Syracuse in central New York. And while I was there, I had a slow burning vision that brought me to where I am today. We'll talk more about that, I'm sure. But today I am a church planter in my hometown in Vermont, in northern Vermont. The only vineyard church that exists in Vermont right now is this one. And so that's what I'm doing full time. I work part time to kind of supplement the income. My wife is working full time. And we're making a home out of this place where I grew up. I'm actually in the house where I was a boy. Both my parents are gone. And so the house has been vacant for a little while. And we ended up renovating it this last summer to make it at least livable for this winter. And of course, there's more to do there, but that's what I'm doing now, church planting after having pastored. Before that, I was a school teacher for over 15 years in Western New York.
It's funny. I remember last time we talked on the phone, we were talking about installing toilets. How did that go? Just on a side note.
Oh, I've done my handful of toilets, usually twice. Yes. I'm not a pro in the building realm, but I've done everything at least 3 times. Sometimes the same physical artifact has been installed 3 times before I got it right. But I pretty widely experienced. It's a lot of fun. And it's been really special to make this house into something that we sort of my wife and I have dreamed about for a few decades.
Oh, that's pretty cool. And I'm happy to hear that the toilets are working.
They're all working.
That's good. So I know some of the questions might have you kind of repeating yourself a little bit, but so what is some of the ministry work that you're currently doing?
So right now, what I'm doing is gathering. There is I would say, I don't want to say no healthy church, but there's no church quite like the way I feel like God has called us to do it right here in this county. So the county's about 21,000 people, 7 or 8 towns in the county. It's a rural spot, one of the least populated counties in Vermont. And so what I'm doing is gathering, connecting, trying to build a relationship. That's one of the reasons. Another reason that I'm working part-time apart from the ministry is it gives me a whole new pool of people to connect with and get to know and learn their stories and support them. I see my job as primarily gathering to form a community around the person of Jesus, right? And to let him lead and change us from the inside out. And so the activity on a weekly basis involves a weekly meeting that we're doing as a small group. We meet in the fire station on the other end of the village here. And so what we do there is we spend a little time engaging in worship of Jesus through singing. Then I give a short TED talk followed by a conversation, a robust conversation. Hopefully, there's a lot of engagement around what the scripture might mean to us for the people there who have a relationship with Jesus and those who are just getting started, just kind of figuring it out. And then we pray for each other. We also do a weekly dinner party here at our house. So we're meeting, and that's ministry, but it's not explicitly spiritual. It's mostly just a place to connect and build relationship. It's also an easy place for us to invite someone who's on the fence about Jesus at all, but at least is curious in what we are as a community. So they can come just have dinner. Sometimes we play games. We've carved pumpkins and everything you can imagine you would do just to enjoy each other. And then we're working to connect with the community through the elementary school locally, and also just through other organizations that are doing the kinds of things that we feel would align with the Kingdom of God purposes. So there's a polar plunge coming up in about 3 weeks, which is intended to be a fundraiser for a local organization that is just getting started doing advocacy and education around addiction. And so we're going to go and give away hot cocoa to all the people who have both plunged and watched the plungers. And there is a strong possibility that I will be getting into the frozen lake as well. So just trying to find ways to connect with the community and serve in meaningful ways to build a reputation for Jesus and to create a safe space for people to connect with him and grow.
That's pretty cool. So what led you to moving back to Vermont? Well, yeah, Vermont. Am I right?
Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. It's a long story. I think when I was finishing up my teaching career, both my wife and I felt like we had a sense of calling toward ministry, maybe a little more me than her. She was receptive to the idea, but at that point we weren't sure what form that would take. As it turns out, I was invited to come on staff at a largish church in Central New York, the Vineyard Church there in Syracuse. It's about 1,500 people who call that church their home, and it was about 800 at the time. So beginning, about a decade ago, I started as a pastor there. That has its own story, but what you asked about is how I came to Vermont. And so at that time we were wondering, was it church planting? And at that point, through sharing the idea with some friends and trusted leaders, through prayer, and through a vetting and discernment process the Vineyard Church used at the time, we figured out that church planting wasn't it. We didn't really have the skills to do all that would require. It's a pretty rigorous and intense and can be isolating thing. And so we just knew that was not it. And in that season, the idea of church planting just got tucked away. Not abandoned, but tucked away. So then my father passed in 2016. My mother's been gone for about 20 years, but my dad just passed 4 years ago. And that left this house vacant. And so as my two younger brothers and I were trying to figure out what to do with the house, one of the ideas that sprang to mind instantly was, well, maybe we should move here. Both my brothers are here. Their families are here. I love being here. It's my home. And so that desire began to reawaken, I guess, in us. And we wrestled with it from that angle for, about a year. We would come back. I spent all my vacation time. My wife reminds me of this constantly, that for about a year and a half, vacation wasn't vacation. It was coming to this house and doing demo and renovation to probably to sell it. At least that was the backup for sure. For sure, we've got to renovate it if we're going to sell it. It's enough of disrepair that we've got to do at least that. So in the process of doing that repair, I began to open the question up explicitly with Laura. What would we think about it? What would it feel like? So in large part, we spent some of our time figuring it out, just trying it on for size, like try on the idea of what it would be like to live here. And honestly, one of the things that kept us coming back to it was that every time we were here doing a project or visiting with my brothers, we just felt a little, I don't know how to describe it, a little sparkle around the idea of living here. It just felt palpable in a way. It felt like home. And that makes sense for me because it was my childhood home, but not so much for Laura. And for her, it actually felt, to a certain extent, the same. It was sort of a home feel, attracted to not just the house and the property, but to being with my brothers. And I remember in considering it, I tested the idea out on a few of my close friends, other people who were in ministry with me, other people who were, close enough to me that they could hear the idea without first weighing the cost to themselves if we were to leave. And I remember one of them, might have been a spiritual director at the time, said pretty bluntly, I remember one occasion, hey, if you have friends in Vermont, like close, intimate friends in your brothers, regardless of where they are in their spiritual journey, and you don't have close friends where you are right now, you should be thinking about that. Like if you're not going to be able to find that intimate kind of a connection that you were built for where you live, and you can find it there, you got to think about it. You try and find the friends here. If you can't, maybe you should go. So that was one thing. We would ask for prophetic prayer. In the Vineyard movement, it's a norm for us to pray for each other and expect to hear, from the Lord. And so I would ask my friends to do that. People who I thought were particularly attuned and maybe knew us well. I also asked people who had no idea what I was asking for and just said, hey, would you pray and see if the Lord has anything to say? And I remember on one occasion, I did that kind of a general, let me know what you hear. And a trusted person, a pastor, a person with some prophetic insight, a person who's been in ministry for some years, who has a track record of hearing from the Lord, prayed for me. And I remember him praying sort of the wrong way, as it were. And I can only describe this in hindsight, but I remember him saying, I feel like the Lord is reminding you or asking you to put down roots. And that word struck me because I had some other things in my prayer life and in my conversations come to that word root. So he said, put down roots. And so my ears pricked up. I'm like, oh, that sounds like this might be from the Lord. It feels consonant with something else that I'd already heard. And then it was almost visibly that he came out of his moment of prayer and said, where are you right now? Are you in this city? And I said, yeah. He goes, yeah, right there. And then he started praying again. Lord, I just pray you would help Andy to put down roots right where he is. And immediately in my soul, I knew, yeah, the roots part was right. The city where I am is wrong. That was actually a discerning moment for me. And I don't think of his prayer critically. I think of it as a wonderful revelation. He did the best he could hearing from the Lord, just like we all do. Relayed it to the best of his ability, and he did it humbly, right? And the way that I was able to receive it and understand the part that fit me and the part that didn't fit me through my emotions, honestly, was extraordinary. Like, oh yeah, knowing that that's not correct was super helpful.
It's like the flipping the coin thing, where it's like, okay, heads, I'll see this movie; tails, I'll see this other one. And as it's flipping, it's like, I really hope it doesn't land on tails. And it's like,
Exactly.
oh, yeah,
I know what I want to do now. And then so on another occasion when Laura and I were back here in Vermont doing some work, I think it was probably the fall or late summer, we were hustling in the yard, cutting down brush or sweating or doing something crazy like that. At some point we needed to take a break and just stand there. So we're taking a break, we're just standing there, we're standing in the front yard. And I sort of felt prompted to say, hey, do you want to live here? And we sort of held that question for a minute. And we both sort of said, yeah, this is actually what we want. We want to live here. That's what we want. And we both felt like the Lord said, if you want to, that's actually enough. You don't need a lot more than if you want to. You know, it's sort of like if you're choosing between two really good things. I'm not choosing between two bad things. I'm choosing between working in the current ministry situation where I was that was productive and, had all kinds of growth potential for me and seemed to be effective. Like what we were doing was helping. And then moving to Vermont and starting a new church. It's like both are really, it kind of, in one sense, doesn't matter which one you would choose. And so just having the desire to move here felt like the Lord affirmed that to us in the days and weeks following. And one more thing I'll share that was kind of the capstone for me. We went to a retreat, and at the retreat, I was able to receive spiritual direction. I can explain more about what that is if you're unfamiliar, but in this spiritual direction session, I brought this up and in confidence to a person who was going to essentially listen with me to try and hear what the Lord was saying. And he brought me through an Ignation exercise, a Jesuit Ignation exercise. It's really not that complex. Essentially, it was try it on with a little more attention to detail. So what he said was, okay, imagine you are staying. You're staying where you are. You don't have to think about it anymore. You're staying. Talk about what's happening. Tell me what you're doing. Who are you talking to? What kinds of things are happening? What's frustrating to you? What are the obstacles in your way? He just kind of got me to talk for 10 minutes or so. Prompted me when I sort of tapered off. And then he said, okay, enough of that. About 10 minutes later, he says, okay, you're going to Vermont. Who are you talking to? What are you doing? What's happening? Who are you getting to know? What's happening with your brothers? Kind of, again, just prompting me to talk, to elaborate, to imagine, essentially use my imagination. At the end of that 10 minutes, he paused. He said, okay, let's just pause and hold that in silence for a moment or two. And then he asked me to reflect. What was happening with your body? What was happening with your emotions when you were talking about staying? And as I reflected, I realized that my shoulders were lowered, my head was down, my voice was quiet, I was serious. I was, in a sense, maybe focused on being correct, those sorts of things. So now, what was it like in your body and your emotions when you were talking about going? And my face was up, my body was lifted, my voice was higher in the air. I just had a lot more excitement and anticipation. He said, what do you think that indicates? He's asking again, he's not telling me, right? What do you think that shows you? What do you think Jesus would say to you about that? And it just seemed clear to me that the pairing of my imagination, use of my imagination, and the attentiveness to what my emotions were telling me, it was kind of clear. That was a kind of a capstone moment. Like all of the discernment that we had gone through up to that moment was clarified and solidified in that moment. And then I recall he asked me, who is someone that you know that you've spoken to there? Talk to them. Talk to me as if you're talking to them, someone who doesn't know Jesus, who you are trying to connect with, because he could tell that's what my heart was for, was to help disconnected people connect with Jesus. And as I began to relay a conversation, role-playing with him as if he were this specific other person, I broke down in tears. And it was so powerful a moment that he broke down in tears. He doesn't know this person, as I'm just sharing the kind of things that I think Jesus wants to do in the unchurched people who are a part of my hometown. I was just overwhelmed, and the presence of the Lord was there, and it was really real and unmistakable. So from that point on, there's a lot more that I could share, but from that point on, it felt pretty clear. Laura and I still had to work it out together because she wasn't exactly in the same spot, and I biffed a couple of times communicating outside the circle of our marriage to other people. Actually, immediately on that occasion, I totally blew it. I started sharing with someone because it was so exciting, and she felt betrayed by that. I royally messed that part up. it took some, I mean, we went to counseling about that for sure. And then, as we worked together, I mean, if we had not been together on it, it also would not have made any sense, but it just gradually became more and more a thing that was for us, and not just for me. So there's more that I could share. I probably have another dozen or so prophetic words that were given. I just kept farming the idea out to people I trusted and asking for prayer and listening, and just actually listening also to people, not only on the spiritual, but on the competency and skill level. Like I went to my senior pastor and said, hey, this is something I'm thinking about doing. How do you think that would be? And this is my boss, the guy who has a vested interest in me staying where I am, if he thinks I'm doing a good job, which I think he did. So that was a hard conversation to have, but thank goodness. I've been really grateful for his character and his support and his kingdom mindset, because he encouraged me, affirmed me, gave me some coaching, and agreed to coach me through the whole process and support me in it. Really had faith for us as well. And if he hadn't had faith for us, that would have been a question again. So it wasn't all green lights, right? I mean, and most of those caution lights and obstacles were things that I sort of did foolishly or immature, in an immature way. But over about a year and a half, it just became clearer and clearer that each of those moments had added up to something that was from the Lord.
So what were some? It kind of seems like there's almost like two separate like challenge areas, or areas that had their own like unique challenges. One of like just the idea of moving in the first place, but then the second one of moving and starting a new church. So like, I guess like what were the challenges that were unique to each of those, and then like which challenges kind of like blended together?
I understand why you make that observation from the way I've told the story, but they've been inextricably tied together in my mind. It was certainly they had different kinds of stressors. The stress of the move was imminent and physical and emotional in its own way. Anyone who moves goes through that, and it creates all kinds of anxiety that you got to deal with one way or another. The plant, that's not a point in time, right? And so today I have to deal with the anxieties that come with the plant today. How am I doing? What's happening? Is what I'm doing to foster people's growth in discipleship bearing fruit? Is it the most helpful way to do it? And that's why I still have meetings regularly. I mean, at least once a month with a spiritual director, once a month with a coach, about once a month with a mentor as well. And so it's not just my informal relationships with friends who are kind of in the same spot. I mean, I have some really helpful people who've been along the journey ahead of me, who I can ask questions to. And I just, their affirmation and encouragement and coaching is vital, because the call to plant is, I mean, it's not something that I question deeply every day, but it's an ongoing stressor for sure. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And could you actually, like, I know for a while, like as I was in the process of really taking on the responsibility of like, yeah, I really want to do ministry full time. Mm-hmm. I was like actively seeing a spiritual director at least like once a week. Mm-hmm. And then was also like being connected with people in small group and stuff. Mm-hmm. But can you talk a bit about that? Like what is just like, for people who are spiritual director, it's like, is that a guy lighting incense candles? Like what's happening? What is this?
Could be for some, but for me, it's not. Essentially, for about a year before the plant, maybe a year to 6 months, I would meet up with a spiritual director who is a trained spiritual director once a month on a video call. And essentially what we do together is, so to define it in a sense, what he does is he prompts me to share what I see in my life right now. And as I talk about the present, he's listening to what I share and also listening for what the Lord might say, and asks a few questions to bring me to maybe hear what the Lord might be saying. So it's a tightrope walk, because essentially if you boil down what he does, he really doesn't do anything. He doesn't try to lead me to a certain location or action in our conversation like a coach might, and that's why I also have coaching. But he is listening for what shimmers, what seems to be something that the Lord might be in. And for me, in my experience of receiving spiritual direction, essentially what I do is I now have a trusted friend who I know is only for the well-being of my soul. He has no vested interest in the outcome of the church plant, right? So succeed or fail, his relationship with me won't change at all. He has like no dependency on me. And he has that kind of distance. And so when I share with him, what I find is happening for me is that I'm saying things out loud that I haven't quite articulated until I say them out loud. And then he's encouraging and affirming, so that's super helpful.
So like, what's kind of like, even though I'd love to like continue to like dive a bit deeper in like the spiritual director realm of things, I think it'd be a little bit, we can get like some really good stuff out of talking more about like the journey that you had gone through of being up in Syracuse and moving to Vermont. And can you recall like when did you start feeling that, like, I was going to say, like, when did you start feeling you were called to do more? But from what I recall, like, the story wasn't like, one place was better than another. It was more so like, wow, there are these two good opportunities. Mm-hmm. Like, which one should I try to pursue? But when did you start recognizing this like fork in the road, so to speak?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. I think there are a couple of things that I can say about that. I recall on one occasion a peer of mine, another pastor on our team, he and I shared a lunch during the workday, and we began talking about our future. And at one point, he described some things that he was planning on doing, some new things. So we vamped on that for a little while. I wanted to ask him about it and hear about it and learn about it. And then I expressed some of my own curiosity about my future. And then honestly, not just curiosity about my future, but some of my current frustrations, right? So in that spot where I was, I had some, not roadblocks, not like speed limiters, but just I had a sense that my reach could go a little further, perhaps. It wasn't actually ambition, though. I mean, it sounds like ambition when I say it just then, but it was more a sense of frustration. And this buddy of mine said, I think he slammed the table with his hand maybe. He said, just really, he says, it's obvious what's next. I said, oh, really? I mean, what do you see? He says, you need to sit in the pilot's seat. And I was like, oh, do you think? Tell me why. So we talked about that for a little bit. So he named it for me in one moment. I remember feeling like, oh, yeah, maybe that's part of the source of the frustration. Frustration was confusing to me because I believed strongly in what we were doing. I had no conflict with the team or the leadership, or not a strongly differentiated vision for what we should be doing. I mean, maybe here and there, like any reasonable adult might. So I was aligned and I was bonded to, and I was on board with everything we were doing. So this frustration was confusing, right? Where's that frustration coming from? And I've heard other leaders talk about church planting. And one of the things that I recall them saying is that when you've got someone on your team who wants to do new things, and they're kind of a fly in the ointment or a problem, not because of character, not because of anything negative in what they want to do, they just want to do something different. Pay attention to them and invest in them, because they're probably supposed to be leading somewhere else. Just give them lots of energy and time, give them a little bit of space, and be ready to launch them and call it out when it's time. So I think that was part of what he was doing, was noticing that. Even though we were peers, we're on the same level. He called it out then. So there was a little bit of frustration, a little bit of sense of, and honestly, I'm sure it's partly related to my personality. My personality, I tend to strongly desire autonomy. And although I had no difficulty in complying with the vision and supporting the vision, there still was this underlying need to drive. And so my ability to drive within the bounds of my assignment there were also running out. It's like you only drive so much further before it becomes a poor fit.
It's kind of like I'm like remembering like kind of like two things where there's almost a sense like, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but like when you have these two options of like, oh yeah, like these are both two good options, typically for one of them, and I know it sounded like you were feeling this, like one option just kind of sparks something more within you. And there's almost like this, not like a nagging voice, but this like separate entity, this like separate thought of like, well, if you try to pursue the thing that you really feel like is lighting you up on the inside, like, are you sure you're not just pursuing that out of like selfish reasons and things like that? And there's almost like this taboo of like, if you're going to be doing good work, it's got to be work that like slightly doesn't light this fire within you, because work isn't fun and work should be hard. And it's like, yes, work does have those things, but it's like this, like I'm the word is like, it's eluding me right now, but it's like we think, like at least from what I've seen from my experiences, is that there's some people in ministry who have this thought that like if you want to serve God, you have to go through suffering. Like suffering is the end goal, and it's like no, like suffering may be part of the journey, but that's not like the defining factor. So it's like when you have the options of two good things, I feel like some people like will resort to like the lesser of the good because they're afraid that like I shouldn't be trying to pursue this thing that really like sparks this fire within me.
Or perhaps it's seen as a more noble effort if you have to endure suffering a bit. Yeah, that's not an unfamiliar thought to me. It just doesn't feel like it was a part of my process at this time. I'm 49 years old this year, so maybe I heard that thought early enough in my life that I was able to try it on and let it go. That has not been a part of was not part of the decision to come here.
Yeah, just like it was like kind of reminding me, because like I know if I've had that at points where it felt like, oh man, I'd be like super selfish if I were to like do this one thing because it really like fires me up on the inside. Like when people ask like, oh, how are you doing? It's like you want to be like, oh, I'm doing good. You don't want it like, but if things are going great, it's like, why not say that things are going great? It's like, oh well, the other person, they might not be doing as great. I don't want them to feel bad. And it's like, what is it's like such a like, I don't know, that might just be me sometimes, but
it's probably related to personality, right? Everyone has a different way of kind of addressing that question of what feels appropriate. Probably it's personality somewhat.
Yeah. But it was cool. I was hearing about how this one person was sharing this story about how they were working this job, and they were following it, like they're doing their best to like take steps in each direction they felt like God was calling them towards, and they were in this like really good job. And then they started to feel like like I'm trying to remember the exact story, but it was someone who I had just like interviewed with yesterday. He was saying that he had the option to try to get a new car because his old car was running low or whatever. He had it for a while. He's like, oh, I could really get this new car now that I've got this job going. But he felt like maybe I shouldn't. And it was like somehow with the car, it was linked with like, if I get this car, I have to stay at this job. Mm-hmm. But I don't know if I need to stay at this job. I feel like God might be calling me towards something different. And then he was like, you know what, I'm going to do it. I'm going to get the car. I'll just have to work at this job for a few more years, and then I'll leave. As soon as he got the car, the next day when he drove it to work, his boss fired him. And it was like, whoa, like I was expecting something along the lines of like he drove to work and it was foreclosed or like something like that. But to be fired, that's like, dang, that's, and he's like, it's not like I wasn't a good worker. It was just like, they just had to lay off some people. And I was like, wow, that's like, talk about some divine intervention right there. But I don't know. Like, I was just kind of curious. I don't know if you have any stories similar to that, either in your own life or maybe if you've heard stories shared from other people who've had similar experiences. Cause it kind of seems like, oh yeah, option A is good. Option B is just as good, but I feel like I should go towards B, but you know what? I think we're gonna stick with A. And then, God comes in and kind of intervenes and he's like, okay, you tried, but I'm just gonna get rid of that option for you.
Yeah, I'm sure that has happened. I can't think of anything specific. I think in my story, one of the things that rises to the surface about making decisions over the long haul is that I've often included people that I trust in the decision making. I remember 26 years ago in college, and Laura and I have gotten to know each other. We've started dating, and I thought, man, I should marry this woman. She's my wife now. But I remember taking a long walk with one of the, he wasn't a student, he was an adult, helping to facilitate a community on campus there. And I took a long walk with him on campus, just kind of posing the question together, holding the question, together. What would it feel like for me and Laura to get together? And I just remember him being like, oh yeah, you should just do it. You totally need to do it. I expressed the things that I was concerned about in my own life and things that I wondered about her family and all of that. And he's like, yeah, no, I mean, those things are important, but they're not deal breakers. You should go for it. You should do it. And I mean, that wasn't the reason that I asked her to marry me, but I needed to talk to him about it. I needed to think it through aloud with him. And that was, I was 22 or something. I really didn't know that much about making decisions. I can commend the book, What's Your Decision? Don't know the author's name, but that's the title of the book, What's Your Decision? And it essentially prescribes this Ignatian way of making decisions. If you don't know the story of Ignatius, and I won't bore you with the details, but he discovered this mode of listening to what your emotions are telling you when he was convalescing. He was a war hero and kind of, well, maybe not a hero, he was a soldier, and had, an ambitious life, was wounded significantly, and took respite in his family's home. While he was convalescing there, he only had two things that he could read. One were like romantic hero tales, think romance novels, but meant for guys, right? So the hero of these tales is always a soldier who wins great acclaim, victory, and then gets the girl, right? And they might have been a little bit more than G-rated, right? The other thing he had to read was the stories of the saints and martyrs, right? And so he enjoyed reading them both. After reflecting on it, what he realized is that having read these soldier tales, he ate it up while he was reading it. But once he put it down, he felt dirty. He felt disrupted, disintegrated. He felt negative, right? And while he read the stories of the saints and the martyrs, he felt inspired and enjoyed it and thoroughly. And when he set it down, he felt clean. He felt lifted. And so he understood, and that's one instance, right? It's kind of the genesis of this idea of pairing your imagination and your emotions in the presence of the Lord to kind of hear what might be the right decision. That idea is something I've stumbled on, in the last few years, again, through some friends who were trying to help me make a decision. But I can't recommend the book more highly. I mean, it's a really helpful book, lays out in plain English, and it's not a dominating idea. It's a really invitational idea, really helpful. What's your decision? Yeah. The director of the Vineyard National USA, Phil Strout, gave it to a bunch of leaders. I happened to be one of those leaders at the time and received it from him, and passed it along to a handful of other friends who it's helped as well. So
that's pretty cool. So like on that idea of like this Ignation way of making decisions, what was some of like the feelings and emotions and ideas that you had when imagining moving and starting a new church?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that I remember, so let me take a pause before I answer that directly and just relay that on one occasion, I remember waking up in the morning. I think we were here in Vermont. We were visiting with my brother. We're at least staying at his house. And I remember waking up, and that there's that twilight moment before you're quite awake. You're not quite dreaming. You're not quite awake. And I feel like a couple of times that's when the Lord will speak to me. It's not exactly a dream, not exactly just meditating or musing, but in that spot, I remember hearing from the Lord, "Don't put your light under a bushel." And I thought, my first reaction was, yeah, maybe if I move to this obscure, poorly populated county in northern New England, and try to do this thing, what's going to be happening is I'm going to be putting a bushel basket over the light of the gift that Jesus has given me to serve in the kingdom. And as I thought about that for a minute, I was like, oh no, it's the other way. If I stay in my current position where I am, I'll be able to thrive and function and serve, and it will work well. But that would actually be putting my light under a bushel. To stay where I am would be covering the gift that Jesus has given me. So in other words, it could have been interpreted both ways. How did I know which way to interpret it? It was only because one resonated with me as I held both ideas in the presence of Jesus. He illuminated the one and obscured the other. Even though I started with one, that's the one he kind of said, no, that's not what I meant. So that is another picture of this idea of what it means to choose between two good options, right? It's not just two good decisions, both of which would be fruitful, but two viable interpretations. Either one could have been an appropriate interpretation of what Jesus was saying when he said, "Don't put your light under a bushel." But I just knew which one as I was holding the question in his presence and asking him, "What are you trying to say?" And that's all that I just shared there, holding it in his presence, asking what to say. Sounds really formulaic. It wasn't like that. It wasn't like, "Oh, Jesus, what do you?" I just was like living with it, trying to sort it out, trying to understand it. And the one idea was made plain. The things that I felt about the plant that helped me to move in the direction of planting were excitement, anticipation, this great hope that I have of connecting my high school friends and their kids. I'm 30 years out of high school, but those people who have stayed here in this county, in Lamoille County, for the last 30 years while I've been out doing other things, they've stayed. And in one sense, some of them are stuck, right? They're stuck in a life without Jesus that can only be made free by Jesus himself. And I know that. And it's not that they need a better job. It's not that they need to move. It's not that they need new hobbies or new friends or new cars. They need Jesus. And so when I thought about helping them to connect with him, it just made me alive. over and over again, that idea, I would think of this person or that. I would wake up in that half awake, half dream state and think of someone from my high school who I wasn't even friends with. Like, why did that person come to my mind just then? Oh, is that you, the Lord? I mean, is that you, Lord? What are you trying to share with me about this person? Or I would think about my brothers and their lives and think, oh man, how did I end up with this life with Jesus? And they have a life that's pretty much absent of any spiritual story. What is it that, how can I just keep doing good things over here in Syracuse and in a sense, leave them to fend for themselves, right? I could invest here and be fruitful, but man, who's investing there? Someone's got to do it. Man, if someone's got to do it, maybe it should be me. Kind of that holy discontent thing of, if there's no living, viable vineyard style church there, and I'm the one who's bothered by it, maybe I'm the one who's supposed to go do it, but that excitement about excitement on the one hand and anticipation and the faith-filled hope, right, of helping people connect with Jesus, paired with this, it's a little heavy-handed to say that I was losing grace for my assignment in Syracuse. That feels a little overstated, but in some sense, the favor, the delight, the enjoyment, the satisfaction of doing that job well didn't satisfy as much or in the same ways. And I don't know where my theology comes from on that, but I do have a sense that the Lord was taking away the one assignment in order to give me the other. And that's a grace of his, right? In order to actually do this thing, I couldn't love the first as much. Otherwise, it would really be a heartbreak. That's true in my case anyway. I'm sure it's not true for everybody.
And what's that journey been like going from being in Syracuse to Vermont? So it's kind of like now at this point in the story, you've already like made the decision, and like, what's that journey been like?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a complicated question to answer. There's a lot of facets to it. But one of the dominating emotions in this season is, and it's new for me, is a kind of a self-doubt, like, oh, how am I doing? Am I doing this right? I was talking with my coach this morning about, well, I think it's a great story, but about 3 weeks ago, my wife and I finished Halo 4. So we're almost 50 years old. We're not gamers, but we're playing Xbox and we're playing Halo because you can sit on the couch and play together, right? There you go. There you go. There you go. So we finish it, and it's been like, I don't know, maybe 3 months, and we finished the game. We're not like avid gamers or anything, but we played it a bunch. And that's through the holidays, right? So we finish it, and I'm like, oh, what does this say about us? Are we terrible people that here we are supposed to be planning a church, and we just cruised through all of the chapters of this video game together? Oh man, maybe we should be doing more about like kingdom stuff than just playing video games. This is probably bad. And so I'm sharing this with my coach, and I also shared it with my spiritual director. And one of them said to me, oh, you mean you just moved to a new town where you don't have any friends, and it's the middle of winter in a climate where no one goes outdoors most of the time, and you found a way to sit together with your wife several evenings in a row for about 3 months and had some fun together? That's terrible. I mean, he's being sarcastic. I was like, oh, you're right. He said, yeah, if you told anyone unchurched, right, anyone who's not a pastor, that you just spent 3 months playing a video game with your wife, they would probably say, you guys must have an incredible marriage. How does this even happen? You guys play video games together? This is ridiculous. Spending all this time. We don't do anything like that. He said, as pastors, we tend to just think that, we have this weird guilt thing. Like, oh, yeah, I shouldn't be. I should be. It's like, yeah, just let that go, man. Let that go. You're doing good. You guys are enjoying each other. And you're not playing video games from 9 in the morning till 3 a.m. This is a different thing. It's not you playing till your eyeballs bleed. You're doing something together. So anyway, that is an illustration of this like self-doubt, this thing, which is fairly new to me. I think I've been a pretty confident leader in at least I was in my previous assignment, and not just being confident, but portraying confidence and leading from that place of strength. And interestingly enough, I've also been on a personal journey of an inner journey of becoming a more authentic, humble leader, like leading from a place of vulnerability versus leading from a place of strength. It's really great to be in that season at this time as I'm planting, in a small community where that large leader would be a mismatch, right? That big presence in the room is not how you lead a group of 10 people as they're, as you're forming a fledgling community. So, man, I feel the grace of Jesus in that too. That I'm been on this journey for a couple of years of like learning how to listen to my auto response. What's my knee jerk reaction, and what does that say about how I'm thinking about other people and how I'm treating other people. Learn to be a better listener, showing up in ways that I choose to rather than showing up in automatic autopilot ways. So yeah.
So I'm trying to like, what advice would you give someone who is at that part in the journey? They're at that fork in the road, and I think just like kind of stick with the theme that we've been talking about. They're at that fork in the road, and option A and option B are both good, and they're just not too sure where to move next.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure it's different for each person, what that anxiety feels like and how it comes out. Because if you're trying to choose between two good options, and you're weighing it, and that burden is on you, it probably in part means that you just want to do well, right? You want to do well. You want to do things that would be pleasing to Jesus, that would be fitting for your life, that would be fruitful and productive for the kingdom, right? And so that's actually a really good sign. First thing I would say is just this is a good sign that you're trying to weigh it out is a really good signal that you have the right kind of heart about it. I mean, I might also then say, relax in it, that's really hard to do, and that's not super practical. So you might need help in relaxing with it. You might need to unload some of that anxiety on people who are close to you. And you don't have to call it anxiety. I mean, you can just say, I'm struggling with what to do. Can you share that with me? And if you don't have people who you can share that with, man, that's the first thing you got to do. You just got to get people who you can share that with. I have a friend who told me, if you don't have friends you can share these things with, pay for them. I mean, like, pay for a spiritual director, pay for a coach, pay for a mentor. If you need it, pay for counseling. If you don't have friends who you can talk to about it, you just have to pay for it. Don't go for it. I wouldn't go forward without it. And then I think the third thing that's true for my story, at least, that I would commend to anyone in that spot is to maybe shift your definition of what prayer is like, of what prayer is meant to be, and let lots of your life, your inner life, be prayer, right? So it's not just an intentioned conversation with an outcome that's an answer. That would be nice in some sense, but that's actually not what it mostly is. I mean, as I read the Psalms, I hear prayers being groans. Those are just groanings. Some of them are accusations. Some are railings against what is. Dreaming for what would be out loud with kind of an angry tone, frustrated tone. I would say that a lot of what you do in your thinking could be prayer, and it's just a matter of maybe holding it in the right posture and letting it be malleable, changeable. It's hard to answer the question without saying something simplistic like pray about it. And so what I'm trying to do as I describe this idea of broadening your mind around prayer is to encourage people to give themselves permission to take time with the conversation with Jesus, let it unfold in whatever way works for your personality. I mean, it could be journaling. It could be extended times of solitude or stillness. It could include things like fasting. And the reasons these spiritual practices have been handed down to us over generations is because they actually help us to become free from distractions and potentially free from attachments. We can get attached to the things that we're not meant to be attached to. And so, there's no one way to like write the recipe for someone, but for each of your own personalities, there's probably something that would help you to become less distracted, more focused, to become less attached to some of the things that you hold close now, to gravitate closer to Jesus and what his heart would be. And then, man, if it really is two good things, I mean, I've already said this, but I think listening to what your heart is telling you, I think we've maybe been told in some Christian circles that our emotions are untrustworthy, that they're not to be listened to because they'll lead us astray. But I think that we would not be created with emotions if they weren't by design to inform us of something. I mean, I'm a kind of a dominant sort of person in my native personality, kind of I can bulldoze, right, people. And what I've learned about my favorite media consumption, be it streamed or going to the movies or whatever it is, if I can find something that awakens compassion in me in a movie or story, then that's something that I need to treasure, because it's an antidote to that maybe natural response that I have to be in charge and know the answers, right? And so when you are listening to Jesus for a decision. I think listening to what your emotions tell you about it, as I've illustrated through a few different examples in my life, is something that you should count in the weighing of things. I mean, I slipping into a little bit of a teacher mode here, so I won't do this for very long. But I think there is a hierarchy of weights that these things have as we consider, how we're informed, right? So circumstances, you mentioned the story of like buying the car, getting fired. I'd call that the circumstances of your life informing you. And that to me is the least reliable. I mean, that's me, right? This is the way I live with the world. But watching what the circumstances inform me of is too unreliable for me to lay a lot of weight onto it. Well, that's an extreme example, and I don't know the rest of this person's story, so I don't need to discount that. But for me, when my life circumstances seem to be pointing me in one direction, I'll notice, but I don't weigh it over much. What other people want from me, again, kind of in that outer circle. But what my trusted friends who know me think is true, that moves into the center of the circle. Like that carries a little more weight. What I have seen in the lives of people in Scripture or people in the kingdom, that if it looks like that, man, that's enough that brings it in the circle again. If I can see it in Scripture, and that's really great. If I hear the voice of the Lord about something in a prophetic way, I weigh that. I have to know that my listener is tainted, right? I can't listen perfectly, can't hear perfectly. There's always a mix in what I hear from the Lord between what He's actually saying and what I'm actually hearing, right? So I weigh that, but I mean it's pretty significant. But I have to sift that a little bit, and then the emotions is just another piece in that. So I kind of see it as concentric circles of what if I'm trying to hit the target of making the right decision, some of those things live on the outside and some live closer to the middle.
So just as like a wrap up, is there anything that you would like to kind of like promote in terms of like the church that you're starting up, or like the ministry or the resources that you offer?
Oh, not particularly. No, I think what we're trying to do here is to build a community of people that do life together, that follow Jesus, and that are changed by His love. And I think that the key where I am to bringing Jesus to people and connecting them with Him is to have very real, very frequent, very honest conversations about all of life. Conversations in which we totally disagree with each other and still stay bonded and connected in friendship. Conversations where we're laughing and eating and enjoying each other and know each other's lives and begin to depend on each other, no matter where we are in our journey with Jesus. And in that place, we learn together to hear the voice of the Lord. I mean, He's the one who actually has to lead us, right? So we learn to hear the way He is leading us. And as we do that, one of the things that we need to hear most is that He just deeply, deeply loves us. He loves us. And that love that He has for us, we need to figure out how to receive that even better and better, right? The more readily and easily we receive His love, the more freely we're going to be able to give it away. And so that's the kind of community we're trying to build here. Very excited to see it happen here in Lamoille County.
Yeah, that sounds like, I hope that more church communities start kind of like modeling what it is that you guys are trying to do. So it sounds like really great values that very like clearly exemplify like the characteristics of the kingdom of God, as well as just like kind of how churches and communities in that we see are built in the Bible, in Acts and stuff like that. But are there any other like books?
Well, I've done a lot of reading on spiritual direction. My wife is actually training to be a spiritual director, and so I can recommend a couple that are fresh on my mind that would actually lead people in the direction of finding a good spiritual director, or actually just learning how to listen like a spiritual director listens. If you're into the Enneagram, the Sacred Enneagram is a new book that I'm a few chapters into. I've read a handful of books on the Enneagram, and if you don't know what it is, just Google it, you'll find it. But this particular book, I think, has a really good blend of identifying which personality traits you have as an individual, as a growing up individual. But then the point of the book, as far as I can understand it, is to help view those personality traits as a roadmap to move closer to Jesus, right? So they illustrate not only your strengths, but some of your weaknesses, and your shadow side, as it's represented in your own personality, gives great clues as to what Jesus wants to do in your life as He leads you forward. So that's a helpful book, Sacred Enneagram. The there's the Brazos Introduction to Christianity. It's a textbookish book, but there is a chapter in there around making decisions. I think it's chapter 11. So just look up Brazos Introduction to Christianity. I think it's chapter 11. That one could be really helpful. There's another book around discerning what God's will is that could be helpful and interesting. It's called Let Your Life Speak. Again, it's in that Ignation school of thought, but it may actually include a bit more of where I've gotten the idea around this hierarchy of things that contribute towards, that inform us in different ways, right? So letting your life speak, you can imagine from the title, right? There's evidence in our lives as to what God has already placed in us. If he's already put it in us, it's probably for a future purpose, for his missional purpose for our lives. So that's another. And the last thing I'll recommend isn't a book per se, but I believe there may be some print materials available sometime soon. There's an organization that I'm connected with that is based out of the Arvada Vineyard Church in Colorado, Denver, Colorado. The organization is known as Faith Walking, and Faith Walking is a discipleship process or journey that you can go through. Begins with a 2-day weekend. They've been offered at the Blue Root Vineyard in Philadelphia. I think there's one coming up this year in New Haven, Connecticut at the Elm City Vineyard. The 1-day weekend exposes you to some of the key thoughts around your first formation, how you were formed through your family of origins, upbringing, and your life experiences. And in contrast to our second formation, the formation that we have as we follow Jesus, the contrast between those two for each of us is a very personal journey, but the weekend leads you to some times of reflection and small group discussion and self-discovery that are really, really helpful. From that weekend, then you can begin a 6-month journey with a cohort and a coaching. So I've actually become a coach for Faith Walking now. And I have my first cohort of coachees beginning next week. So 3 individuals who've been to the weekend and have just started the 6-month journey. I'm going to walk with them through that journey for the next 6 months as they discover kind of what's going on for them as they grow in their inner life. And then it just goes on from there. But that faith walking journey is what I alluded to when I said I've been on a 2-year journey of discovering how to show up in new ways, to not show up in my autopilot and not dominate or try to win or try to look good, or at least try not to lose or try not to look bad. I don't need to show up those ways in the ways that I have my whole life. I can choose how to show up in the light of what Jesus has done for me, in the light of Jesus' love. So that's faith walking. If you ever get an opportunity to try out a weekend, I would strongly encourage you to do so.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, the Blue Root Vineyard's actually fairly close to where we live at around here, so I'm definitely going to be keeping my ears open for when I hear about that coming up during one weekend.
Yeah, reach out to Kathy Maskell over there. She's one of the pastors on staff part of the Vineyard Justice Network, and she tends to facilitate those weekends. So Kathy Maskell, it's great.
Cool. Well, Andy, thank you so much for taking time out of your day. Happy to hear that you guys beat Halo 4. That's that's an accomplishment. Yeah.
It was super fun.
But yeah, hey, I look forward to speaking again and hearing more about the growth of the church that you got planting there.
Cool. All right, thanks, man.
Yeah. All right, Andy. Well, yeah, I gotta head out, but it was lovely speaking with you. I really appreciated being able to catch up and also gain those little nuggets of wisdom from you.
All right, hope it's helpful. Looking forward to the outcome.
Yeah. All right. I'll see you later.
Yeah.
Hey guys, thank you so much for watching our video. If you'd like to join the crew of current Christian supporters, you can do so by hitting that subscribe button. It really help us out a lot. And if you want to watch more of our videos, you can do so by clicking any of those videos on the side right there. Yep, just click any of those options that you want.